The sun was high when Dyna guided her Royal Blue for F-150 along a deserted road, the kind of place where nothing ever happens. The drive was calm, almost meditative until it wasn't. The roar of engines shattered the silence. A pack of bikers closed in, forcing her to the shoulder like predators herding prey. Brad stepped forward, smiling before the violence began. Steel was torn apart, windows exploded, and her truck was reduced to wreckage in minutes. They weren't robbing her. They weren't warning her. They were deciding whether to kill her simply because she was there. What they didn't see was the stillness in Dyna's eyes, the controlled breathing, the way her body shifted without panic. Years of elite Navy SEAL training surfaced in silence. In the chaos, she vanished, leaving confusion, dust, and a fatal miscalculation behind. Seconds later, the desert thundered again. Dyna tore down the road on a stolen Harley Dyna lowrider, the engine growling like a challenge to the men she'd just outplayed. The wind cut across her face, and a sharp, almost defiant laugh escaped her lips. Not fear, not relief, but certainty. Behind her, Brad screamed in fury as he realized what she'd taken from him. He swore revenge, convinced he would finish what he started. He had no idea this was the moment everything began to collapse. But before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Now, let's understand how this story really began. The mid-afternoon sun struck the hood of the Royal Blue F-150 at a shallow angle, throwing a clean blade of light across the asphalt of Route 66. The truck moved with steady discipline, tires humming at a constant RPM, suspension barely flexing as it ate up the empty highway. It wasn't customized for show, it was maintained. The paint was unblemished, the windshield flawless, the interior stripped of clutter. Everything had a place, everything was controlled. Behind the wheel sat Dyna. At 30, her posture appeared loose to an untrained eye, one elbow resting lightly near the window, shoulders relaxed, but nothing about her was casual. Her spine stayed aligned, chin slightly down, peripheral vision active. Her gaze moved in short, deliberate sweeps. Mirrors, horizon, shoulder, rear view, condition yellow. The state lived in muscle memory, not thought. 3 deployments had burned it in deeper than habit. Her breathing followed a 4-count cadence. In through the nose, hold, out through the mouth, no wasted motion. The desert stretched wide and indifferent around her. Heat shimmered above the road. The radio was off. She preferred silence when she drove alone. Silence left room for data. The first vibration came through the steering column before the sound reached her ears. Low frequency. Multiple engines, V-twins, by the cadence. She didn't turn her head immediately. Her left thumb flicked the mirror control, a millimeter, adjusting angle without breaking posture. Chrome flashed behind her, then leather, then numbers. They came fast, engines flaring, riding staggered but loose, no formal formation, just enough coordination to signal shared intent. The Iron Vipers, their patch was unmistakable. Dyna's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a single muscle firing beneath her cheekbone. The lead rider surged ahead and cut hard across her lane. Dyna's foot was already moving before conscious thought caught up. Brake pressure applied smoothly, threshold braking, ABS chattering once before releasing. The F-150 slewed sideways, tires throwing dust as it slid to a stop, inches short of impact. The seatbelt locked against her clavicle. Her left hand tightened on the wheel, tendons standing out beneath the skin. Engine screamed as the bikes boxed her in. She didn't reach for the door. She didn't fumble for her phone. Her pulse climbed, then settled, adrenaline controlled, not wasted. She counted bodies. 1, 2, 3, 5, 7. The angles closed. Metal struck paint. The first impact rang like a gunshot. A tire iron crumpled the front fender, steel folding with a shriek. Another blow spider-webbed the side window. Safety glass fractured but held, bowing inward. A crowbar smashed the windshield, the laminated layers splintering into opaque white. The truck rocked under the assault, suspension groaning. They weren't posturing, this was methodical destruction. Dyna's fingers flexed once, then stilled. Her breathing shortened, held at the top of the inhale. She tasted copper. The leader dismounted directly in front of her door. Brad. He moved with the confidence of a man used to compliance, wide stance, shoulders loose, a grin that never reached his eyes. Dust clung to his boots, his gaze swept over her, dismissed her. A woman alone, no visible weapon, no witnesses. He yanked the door handle, the latch popped, the door swung open. As he leaned in, his hand came up toward her throat. Dyna moved. Her left hand shot out, trapping his wrist before his fingers closed. Her right forearm drove into the crook of his elbow, applying rotational force. Ulnar nerve compression. His grip failed instantly. She pivoted her hips, using the confined space to generate torque, and slammed his face into the steel edge of the door frame. Cartilage cracked, blood sprayed across the blue paint. Brad screamed, more from shock than pain. Dyna was already unbuckling. She rolled out of the cab low, boots hitting dirt, shoulders tucked. Gravel bit into her palms as she came up inside their perimeter. For half a second, the bikers froze, brains lagging behind reality. That half second was enough. She didn't retreat, she advanced. Her eyes locked on the Harley Dyna lowrider idling 10 feet away, custom exhaust, high compression idle, keys still in the ignition. A sigh born of arrogance, she sprinted, a hand grabbed at her jacket and missed. She vaulted the bike in one fluid motion, seat beneath her before anyone could react. Her left foot kicked to stand up as her right hand twisted the throttle hard. The engine roared, torque snapping the bike forward. She glanced back once. Brad was on his knees in the dust, hands clamped to his ruined nose, blood streaming between his fingers. His eyes met hers, confusion, rage, disbelief colliding at once. Dyna's lips parted. The sound that came out wasn't loud, but it cut through the engine nose like glass. A short, cold laugh, no humor, no mercy. Then she dumped the clutch and tore down the road, dust swallowing the wreckage behind her. Dyna kept the throttle pinned long after the last sound of engines faded behind her. The Harley's V-twin hammered beneath her, vibration climbing through the frame and into her forearms, a steady mechanical pulse that matched the narrowing of her focus. The road unspooled in a straight, merciless line, heat mirage dancing at the edges of her vision. She didn't look back again. Backward was irrelevant. At 10 miles, she broke hard to the right. The front tire left asphalt and bit into gravel. She shifted her weight instinctively, knees gripping the tank, wrists loose. The Dyna fishtailed once, then stabilized as she drove it off-road, threading between scrub brush and fractured stone. A cluster of limestone rose ahead, jagged, pale, offering concealment rather than cover. She guided the bike in behind it, killed the engine, and let momentum carry her the final few feet. Silence slammed down. Not absence of sound, presence of it. Wind brushing through dry grass. Metal ticking as the engine shed heat, her own breath, shallow for 2 seconds before she forced it down into her diaphragm. In, hold, out. She dismounted slowly, boots crunching softly against rock. Her right hand hovered near her thigh, fingers curled as if still expecting recoil. A faint tremor passed through them, then stopped. She stepped away from the bike and circled it once, eyes tracking lines, angles, reflections. No pursuit dust, no engine nose, not yet. The Harley was immaculate, custom paint, clean welds, aftermarket exhaust tuned for intimidation more than efficiency. A machine built to be seen. Dyna ran to fingers along the tank, feeling residual warmth under the metal. Her jaw set. This wasn't theft, this was asset seizure. She pressed 2 fingers into the side of her neck, just below the jawline, counted. The pulse was slow, even. 60 beats per minute, no arrhythmia, no tremor. The adrenaline spike had already burned off, metabolized and discarded. Her body had done what it was trained to do. Most people would be calling emergency services by now. Hands shaking, voice cracking as they tried to explain what had just happened. Dyna's phone stayed in her pocket, inert. Her gaze drifted instead to the memory she couldn't dislodge the moment before the ambush, when the dust had parted just enough. A shape in the ditch, human, prone, limbs at the wrong angles, no movement. She had cataloged it in less than a second. Civilian clothing, no helmet. No blood pooling visible from the row, which meant the fatal damage was likely internal or cranial. Execution, not accident, the kind that happens when someone doesn't want witnesses. Her lips pressed into a thin line. The muscles along her jaw jumped once, a small involuntary tick she didn't bother to suppress. Calling local law enforcement would turn her into evidence. A witness statement logged by a sheriff who shared beers with men wearing Iron Viper's patches. She had seen that ecosystem before. Small jurisdictions, blurred lines, power concentrated into few hands for too long. The kind of place where reports got lost and inconvenient narratives died quietly. She turned back to the bike and crouched beside it, movements economical. Her fingers popped the saddlebag latch. The leather creaked as she lifted the flap. Inside were two items, placed without care. The first was a thick, leather-bound ledger. The second, a heavy Ziploc bag that sagged with weight, corners squared by stacked contents. Cash? Maybe. She ignored the bag and took the ledger, its spine stiff under her thumb. The leather was worn smooth from handling. She opened it. Her breath caught not sharply, but enough to stall for half a beat. Photographs, printed surveillance stills, high resolution, time-stamped. Her front porch, shot from across the street, the side gate to her property. Her sister's bakery, opening time, lights just coming on, flour dust visible on the window from inside. Different angles, different days. Dana's grip tightened. The edge of the paper creased under the pressure. A pulse flared behind her right eye, hot and immediate. This wasn't opportunistic violence. This wasn't road rage or territorial intimidation. Brad hadn't stopped her by accident. The realization moved through her body like cold saline through and for line, flushing heat, sharpening everything it touched. The man in the ditch hadn't been collateral damage. He had been a problem removed. The road had been clear for her. Dana closed the ledger with deliberate care and slid it back into the saddlebag, leaving it exactly as she had found it. She straightened slowly, shoulders rolling back, spine locking into alignment. She looked out toward the horizon, eyes narrowing against the glare. The desert stared back, empty and patient. They thought they were hunters. They had no idea they had just handed her leverage. Night came down fast in the high desert, the way it always did. No warning, no softness. The heat bled out of the ground in minutes, replaced by a dry cold that crept through fabric and settled into bone. Dana sat cross-legged in the dirt behind the limestone outcrop, spine straight, shoulders squared, the stolen Harley positioned at a shallow angle in front of her. She thumbed the headlight on. The beam cut a narrow cone through the darkness, stark and unforgiving, illuminating the open ledger resting on her knees. Taper edges fluttered faintly in the breeze. Her gloved hand pinned them down, the leather creasing under steady pressure. The light carved hard shadows across her face, catching the slight tightening at the corner of her left eye as she scanned line after line. Names, dates, dollar amounts. The body in the ditch replayed in her mind, no longer an isolated image, but a data point snapping into place. The victim hadn't been random. The bikers weren't predators operating on impulse. They were a delivery system. Dana's jaw worked once as she followed the ledger's structure. Payments routed through a localized shell company, LLC names assigned to blur jurisdiction, registered to mail drops to counties away. The transaction cadence was clean, professional. Monthly disbursements, performance bonuses, expense reimbursements. This wasn't biker money, it was corporate. Brad's name appeared repeatedly, not as an owner, as a contractor. Her thumb paused on a page where a parcel number was written in block print. She recognized it instantly, her family land. 300 acres of scrub and rock that her father had refused to sell even when the offers came with extra zeros and friendly smiles. She had refused again after he died. For 3 years, the pressure had stayed just below legal thresholds: letters, surveys, zoning notices that went nowhere. Now it made sense. The pipeline project needed an unobstructed corridor. Eminent domain would have been messy, public, slow. Intimidation was cheaper. Dana closed her eyes for a moment, exhaled through her nose, and let the pieces settle. When she opened them again, the softness was gone. What remained was assessment. She stripped her situation down to fundamentals. One knife, boot-mounted, fixed blade, no firearm, no comms, no overwatch. One stolen motorcycle whose owner still possessed the key fob. No friendly jurisdiction, no immediate allies. She flipped the ledger shut and set it aside, fingers lingering on the cover as if memorizing its weight. She didn't panic. Panic was a luxury for people with options. She needed intelligence. She needed access. Her gaze shifted to the Harley. The bike wasn't just transportation. It was identity. Patch culture ran deep. A Dyna rolling into familiar territory would pass where she couldn't. It was a Trojan horse, loud and arrogant enough to be ignored. She moved to the bike and knelt, unzipping the tool pouch with practiced efficiency. Her hands were steady, nails rimmed with dust, movements precise. She traced the wiring harness beneath the seat, following color-coded lines by touch and sight. The factory immobilizer would lock her out without the fob. She bypassed it anyway, knife blade out, insulation parted cleanly. She stripped wire with her teeth, twisted copper together, soldering by feel using a small butane lighter she carried out of habit. The smell of burning insulation hung briefly in the air. She taped the connection, sealed it, tested continuity. Surgical, silent, the bike would start without permission now. Miles away, neon bled into darkness at the roadside bar known as the Viper's Nest. The place throbbed with bass and anger. Brad paced behind a scarred wooden table, his face swollen, nose wrapped in a towel already soaked through. His hands shook as he jammed ice from a bucket against the injury, breath coming fast and shallow. "Find the bike," he barked, voice cracking as he shoved a prospect aside. "Find the girl. No loose ends." No one met his eyes. His fear wasn't about pain. It was about exposure. His gaze flicked to the door, then to the saddlebags that weren't there. Sweat beaded at his hairline despite the cold. He pulled out his phone with unsteady fingers and turned away from the room. His voice dropped when the call connected. "She got away," he said. Swallowed, and she took the Dyna. A pause. His knuckles whitened around the phone. "Yeah, the ledger's in the bag." Silence stretched on the line, heavy enough to feel. When the voice on the other end finally spoke, Brad's shoulders sagged. Color drained from his face, leaving it ashen beneath the bruising. His breathing hitched once, sharp and involuntary. He ended the call without a word and stared at the dark screen. Dana was no longer a problem to be solved. She was a liability that could bury them all. Dana turned the Harley away from the highway before the first sodium lights of town came into view. She dropped off the asphalt onto a cattle trail cut into the hard pan, a thin scar through scrub bandstone that only locals and ranch hands used. The bike ran blacked out, no headlight, no running lights, engine kept just above stall, clutch feathered to keep the exhaust from barking. Her eyes adjusted quickly, pupils widening, depth perception recalibrating to moonlight and shadow. The trail rose toward a low ridge overlooking the salvage yard. She killed the engine 100 meters out and coasted the last stretch, boots skimming dirt to stabilize the bike. When she stopped, she eased it down by hand, metal ticking softly as it cooled. She lay prone at the crest, elbows digging into gravel, and brought the monocular to her eye. The optic was cheap but serviceable, pulled from Brad's gear without ceremony. She adjusted focus with a careful twist. The yard spread below her like a battlefield after the fight had moved on. Stacks of vehicles rose in crooked towers, frames twisted, paint scraped to bare metal. Forklifts crawled between them like insects. At the center, under a bank of industrial floodlights, the hydraulic crush awaited, jaws open. Her F-150 rolled into position. Even at distance, she recognized it instantly, the royal blue paint dulled by dust but unmistakable. The truck looked small between the steel plates. The machine descended with a slow, merciless inevitability. Metal shrieked as the cab collapsed inward. The hood folded, glass burst outward in a white spray. The sound carried up the ridge, a deep mechanical groan that vibrated in her chest. Dana's jaw tightened, a muscle jumped near her temple. The image fractured into memory without warning. Her father standing in a dealership lot, thinner than he'd been before the chemo, smiling anyway. His hand resting on the hood, knuckles pale. Him pressing the keys into her palm, fingers lingering a second longer than necessary. "Ford tough," he'd said, voice rough but proud. "Just like you." Her throat closed. Breath caught high in her chest, sharp and shallow. One tear broke free, cutting a clean line through the dust on her cheek before she wiped it away with the heel of her hand. The moisture smeared, disappeared. The memory went with it. Something inside her shifted, clean and decisive, like a breaker flipping. Her shoulders settled, her breathing slow. The grief didn't vanish, it was compartmentalized, locked behind a door she would not open again tonight. The operator took over. She slid back from the ridge and descended toward the yard, using wrecked cars as concealment, timing her movement to the rhythm of the machinery. Each step landed softly, weight distributed through the midfoot. Her hands stayed loose at her sides, fingers curled but ready. She counted guards as she moved to bikers near the fence line, attention split between cigarettes and the crusher. Their posture sloppy, weapons slung low. She waited until the compactor cycled again, the nose swallow everything. Dyna crossed open ground in a burst, rolled behind a stack of flattened sedans, and froze. She listened. No alarm, no shout. She advanced again, angling toward the cube of what had been her truck. Up close, the damage was brutal. The cab was crushed into a jagged block, metal folded in on itself, edges sharp enough to cut. She crouched and wedged her arm into the wreckage, ignoring the scrape of steel against skin. Her fingers probed blindly, methodical, mapping the interior by touch, console, wiring, plastic. There, the dashcam housing brushed her knuckles. She shifted, braced, and pulled. Resistance, then give. The SD card came free in her palm, warm from friction. She closed her fist around it, knuckles whitening. Light exploded across the yard. A floodlight snapped on, bleaching the shadows and pinning her in place. Dyna didn't flinch, but her eyes narrowed against the glare, pupils contracting hard. She straightened slowly, keeping her movements deliberate, non-reactive. A voice cut through the machinery, loud and satisfied. "I told you she'd come back for the truck." Brad stepped out from behind a forklift, shotgun already shouldered, muzzle steady on her chest. His nose was swollen and purple, the bandage streaked with dry blood. His mouth pulled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Dyna let her shoulders drop a fraction, weight settling evenly over her feet. Her left hand hung open at her side. Her right remained clenched around the SD card, hidden against her thigh. She met his gaze without blinking. Brad's thumb slid back the hammer with a deliberate click that carried farther than the machinery. The sound cut cleanly through the yard, sharp and final. The shotgun didn't waver in his hands. He stood square now, boots planted. 5 of his men fanned out behind him in a loose semicircle, silhouettes hard-edged under the floodlights. "End of the road, G.I. Jane." The words came with a grin, one corner of his mouth pulling higher than the other, tugging at the swollen skin around his nose. His breathing was shallow, fast, adrenaline and fear fighting for control. Dyna didn't lift her hands. She shifted her weight a fraction, heels grounding into the dirt, shoulders easing back as if she were settling into a firing stance. Her gaze never left Brad's eyes. The SD card appeared between her fingers, raised slowly to chest height, catching the light for just a second. "If you kill me," she said, "this lev streams to the cloud." Her voice was even, unhurried, no tremor, no challenge. The cadence was clinical, the tone of someone delivering a weather report rather than a threat. She let a half-beat pass, watched Brad's pupils flick down to the card and back up again. "And the ledger," she continued. "It's already with a lawyer in DC. It was a lie, clean and contained." She didn't embellish it, she didn't sell it. She simply placed it in the space between them and let it exist. Brad's grin faltered. The shotgun dipped an inch, then steadied again. His jaw worked, teeth grinding as his mind raced ahead of his body. One of the men behind him shifted his stance, boots scraping concrete. Another glanced sideways, uncertainty rippling outward like a fault line. Brad hesitated. For Dyna, the pause was as loud as a gunshot. She felt it register in her nervous system, a brief opening where tempo shifted in her favor. The OODA loop stuttered. Observe, orient, decide. Caught between instinct and doubt, she didn't move. She didn't need to. The moment itself was leverage. Headlights swept across the yard. An engine rolled in low and controlled, tires crunching gravel. A black SUV passed through the gate without slowing, glossy paint reflecting the floodlights. It came to a stop just beyond the semicircle of bikers. The engine cut, a door opened. A man stepped out in a tailored charcoal suit, coat hanging open, posture erect despite the late hour. His movements were economical, familiar in a way Dyna felt before she consciously recognized it. He walked into the light without hurry, hands visible, eyes already on her. "Stand down, Brad." The command was quiet, it carried anyway. Brad turned, relief and confusion tangling across his face. The shotgun lowered another fraction. Dyna's breath caught, sharp and involuntary, then locked in place. She knew that voice. Captain Harrison stopped a few feet short of her, the floodlight carving deep lines into his face that hadn't been there before. The hair at his temples was grayer. The eyes were the same measure, assessing, always calculating margins. "Hello, Dyna," he said. "You always were stubborn about that land." The words landed with more force than any blow. For a split second, the salvage yard tilted, perspective slipping as memory surged. Unbidden briefings, deployments, the sound of his voice over comms telling her to move, to hold, to trust. 6 years of service compressed into a single, sickening realization. Her fingers curled tighter around the SD card. The plastic creaked. Harrison glanced at it, then back to her face. His expression softened. "Practiced and false. You've made this complicated," he said. "It doesn't have to be." Dana's lips parted, then closed again. A muscle jumped beneath her left eye. She said nothing. "I'm running security for the pipeline," Harrison went on. "Contract oversight, risk mitigation, corporate language, polished and bloodless." He gestured faintly toward Brad and the men behind him. "They're just subcontractors," the word scraped. "Give me the ledger, Dyna," he said. "Don't make me order a wet team on one of my own." The implication hung there, heavy and unmistakable. Her chest tightened, breath pressing against a ribcage that refused to expand. Images snapped into alignment: the man in the ditch, the timing, the location. The dead body wasn't collateral, it was the local EPA inspector. The one who had filed an injunction that morning. The one who would have stopped the project. Dyna felt the last trace of uncertainty burn away, leaving something colder and sharper in its place. Her gaze hardened, jaw setting as she looked at the man who had once pinned a trident on her chest. Harrison wasn't just corrupt, he was a traitor to the uniform. "You taught me better than this, sir." Dana's voice carried no volume, no heat. It was flat, restrained, edged with something far heavier than anger, disappointment. The word hung between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Her eyes stayed on Harrison's, searching his face the way she once had during after-action briefs, looking for confirmation that the man in front of her was still the one she had followed into hell. Harrison exhaled slowly through his nose, his shoulders sagged a fraction, as if releasing a weight he'd been carrying longer than this moment. "War creates opportunities, Dyna," he said. His gaze drifted past her, and focused for a beat. "Tease," he paused, lips pressing together. "Tease is expensive." The silence stretched. Somewhere in the yard, metal clanged as machinery cooled. Brad shifted his grip on the shotgun, sweat cutting clean lines through the dust on his forearms. Harrison lifted one hand, palm down, and gave a short, dismissive motion. "Take her." Brad's shoulders squared. One of the bikers stepped forward, boots scraping concrete. Dana's left hand tightened once at her side, fingers curling into a fist so hard the tendons stood out beneath her skin. Her breathing slow, dropped, compressed into her core. She let the SD card fall. It hit the ground and skittered across the concrete, drawing every eye for half a second. That half second was enough. Dana's other hand came up from her jacket and released the object she had palmed since the ridge. It wasn't regulation. It wasn't stamped or serialized. It was crude aluminum, can squirt and packed tight, ignition improvised from stripped flare compound, and a percussion cap, ugly, effective. The flashbang detonated midair. White light obliterated the yard, a concussive slap that punched through closed eyelids and rattled teeth. The sound followed an instant later, a brutal bang that flattened depth perception and shredded balance. Men screamed, hands flying to their faces, bodies staggering as the world dissolved into pain and disorientation. Dyna was already moving. She pivoted on the ball of her foot, low and fast, slipping between two blinded bikers as if they weren't there. Her shoulder clipped one man's chest, just enough to unbalance him. He went down hard, gasping. She vaulted over a pile of scrap, boots barely touching metal, and sprinted for the fence line. By the time vision began to crawl back into the yard, there was nothing to see. No woman, no bike, only the echo of an engine already gone. She didn't head back into town. She took back roads, then smaller ones, then dirt, until the terrain flattened and the lights thinned. 3 towns over, she rolled the Dyna into the parking lot of a hardware store still lit by flickering fluorescence. She dismounted calmly, helmet tucked under her arm, posture unremarkable. Inside, she moved the aisles with purpose, PVC piping. Schedule 40, caps, couplers, fertilizer ammonium nitrate blend stacked low and cheap. Remote triggers from the electrical aisle, package for garage doors and irrigation systems. She paid in cash, receipt folded and discarded in the trash outside. There was no rush now. Dyna rode to the perimeter of the planned pipeline site as dawn threatened in the horizon. Survey stakes dotted the ground like scars. She stopped at the entrance, engine idling, and took in the open space, the lines of approach, the hard cover and the dead ground. Her mind overlaid angles, arcs, contingencies. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she knew by memory. Harrison answered on the second ring. "You want the ledger," she said when the line connected. Her voice was level, stripped of everything unnecessary. "Come get it, old sawmill. Midnight. Bring the checkbook." She ended the call before he could respond. Dyna swung off the bike and picked up a shovel from the bed she had lashed to the Dyna. She drove the blade into the dirt and leaned her weight into it. Soil broke cleanly, dry and cooperative. She kept digging, rhythm steady, breath controlled. She wasn't digging a grave, she was shaping the battlefield. Harrison's SUV rolled to a stop at the edge of the sawmill complex at 11:55 p.m., headlights cutting through dust and rot before snapping off in unison with the other vehicles. Engines idled for a moment, then died. The sudden quiet pressed in, thick and unnatural. The abandoned mill loomed ahead, skeletal beams and rusted corrugated iron silhouetted against a moonless sky. Decades of neglect clung to it, the sour smell of damp wood, the metallic tang of oxidation. It was the kind of place where sound traveled unpredictably and shadows lie. A kill box. Harrison stepped out first. He no longer wore a suit. Plate carrier snug against his torso, comms clipped at his shoulder, gloves tight across his knuckles. The AR-15 rested comfortably in his hands, muzzle down but ready, sling adjusted with professional care. His face was hard now, features set, eyes scanning angles automatically. This was familiar ground for him, even if the purpose was not. Brad and the Iron Vipers followed, boots crunching softly on gravel and splintered planks. Their movements lacked Harrison's discipline, but the weapons in their hands were real enough. Fingers flexed, shoulders rolled, breath thawed faintly in the cold. "Spread out," Harrison said quietly. They did, instinctively forming a loose sweep, spacing uneven but serviceable. Harrison lifted his rifle, sighting along the darkened rafters, then dipped the muzzle to the floor, tracing the gaps between broken boards. "She's Tier 1, he added. "Watch the rafters. Watch the floor." No one answered. A man to Brad's left swallowed hard, Adam's apple jumping visibly. Another adjusted his grip on a pistol, thumb brushing the safety twice before settling. The building answered their presence with a low groan as wind pushed through cracked siding. A loose sheet of metal clattered somewhere above them, and two men flinched despite themselves. They advanced. Each step drew out the mill's voicewood complaining underweight, nails squealing faintly, dust shifting. Sweat beaded along Brad's hairline, cutting tracks through grime. His jaw worked, molars grinding as his eyes darted from corner to corner. The confidence he wore earlier hung on him pearly now, like borrowed clothing. Then he saw it. The Harley Dyna sat in the center of the main warehouse floor, perfectly upright, kickstand down. Its dark paint absorbed what little ambient light there was. On the seat, resting opally, lay the leather-bound ledger. Brad slowed, heart hammering hard enough to thud in his ears. His lips parted slightly as he exhaled, tension bleeding out in a shaky breath. A smile crept across his face, thin and incredulous. "Too easy," he muttered. He took a step forward. "Don't touch it." Harrison's voice cracked through the space, sharp and immediate, but it came a fraction of a second too late. Brad's hand closed around the ledger, fingers curling into the worn leather with a sense of possession that bordered on relief. There was a soft sound beneath it. Click. The ledger depressed a hidden pressure plate. The mechanism engaged instantly. Somewhere above them, heavy counterweights released. Steel cables screamed through pulleys as massive doors slammed shut at both ends of the warehouse. The impact shook the structure, dust raining down in choking clouds. The lights died, not dimmed cut. Absolute darkness swallowed the space, thick enough to feel. Men shouted, overlapping, disoriented. A rifle clattered to the floor. Someone cursed, voice breaking. Brad froze, breath trapped halfway in his chest, eyes wide and useless in the black. His fingers spasmed around the ledger, then loosened as his mind scrambled to catch up. Then sound replaced sight. A low hum surged through the building as a generator kicked on. Speakers crackled overhead, feedback shrieking briefly before stabilizing. Dyna's voice filled the warehouse, calm and intimate, as if she were standing right beside them. "Welcome to Sear School, gentlemen," the words carried evenly, stripped of emotion, every consonant precise. A pause followed long enough for heartbeats to spike, for sweat to bead cold along spines. Lesson 1, she continued. Sensory deprivation. Brad's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Harrison tightened his grip on the rifle, jaw locking as his eyes searched the darkness, already knowing she was nowhere he could see. The mill held its breath. The first shots cracked the darkness like breaking bones. Muzzle flashes bloomed and vanished, brief white scars that burned into retinas and left the air tasting of cordite. The bikers shouted over one another, boots scraping, shoulders colliding. Fingers clenched triggers to heart, knuckles bleaching pale. Harrison's jaw locked as he swung the AR-15 across sectors that no longer existed. The sawmill swallowed sound, warped it, sent it back wrong. "Cease fire," he roared, his voice shredding against the iron walls. A vein pulsed at his temple, the old tell he used to lecture Dyna about loss of fine motor control under stress. "She's trying to make us kill each other." A red flare ignited above them with a hiss like a lit fuse, bathing the rafters in arterial light. Shadows stretched and twisted across the floor, turning men into horned silhouettes, weapons into claws. Sweat beaded along Brad's hairline, ran into his eyes. He blinked hard, vision swimming. His breathing went shallow, rapid hyperventilation setting in. The rope whispered. Dyna dropped from the ceiling inverted, boots brushing a beam as she arrested her descent with practiced precision. Her core stayed tight, body aligned, the way she'd been drilled to do 1,000 times in training houses and ship holds. She hooked an arm around the nearest biker's throat, crushed the carotid with controlled pressure, and hauled him up into the dark. His weapon clattered once against concrete, then nothing. By the time the other spun, she was gone, rope already recoiling. The fear changed flavor then, it sharpened. Men fired again, shorter bursts now, discipline trying to claw its way back through panic. Dyna moved between those bursts, timing them, reading the cadence of untrained shooters. A flare bloomed, and she was somewhere else, a scream cut off mid-breath. Another body hit the floor, air driven from lungs and a wet cough. She worked methodically, a wrist snapped against a beam-clean fracture, radial displacement. Zip ties bit into flesh, cinched until circulation slowed and fingers tingled numb. A choke from behind. Pressure applied just long enough to induce hypoxia without permanent damage. Each man went down with a different sound, a different failure. None of them died. Harrison backed toward a stack of rotting pallets, boots crunching on old nails. He fumbled with his night vision goggles, flipped them down, then cursed as another flare flared to life, overloading the tubes. He ripped them off, breath hitching, control bleeding out in ragged exhales. "Face me, Dyna," he shouted, voice cracking, command presence gone. His shoulders hunched, elbows tight, defensive posture, not leadership. Brad's hands shook as he wiped blood from his mouth. He turned in a slow circle, knife clenched in a white-knuckled grip. The red light shifted, and Dyna stepped into it. She stood still, no rifle, no pistol. Just the heavy wrench in her hand, grease-stained, scarred metal. Her face was calm, but one eyelid twitched once, a tiny betrayal of adrenaline dumping into her system. "You broke my truck, Brad," she said, quiet enough that he had to lean forward to hear it. He charged, a raw animal sound tearing out of his throat. Dyna waited half a heartbeat longer than instinct demanded. She shifted offline, hooked his leg, and drove the wrench down. The impact was dull, final, bone failed. Brad screamed, collapsing as the joint disintegrated, hands scrabbling at the floor as shock rolled in like a tide. Silence crept back into the sawmill, broken only by Brad's keening and the crackle of the dying flare. Dyna turned toward Harrison. The distance between them felt heavier than the darkness had. Student and teacher faced each other, the air thick with things that had never been said. Harrison brought the rifle up on reflex, muzzle searching for center mass. Dyna moved before the thought finished forming. The wrench left her hand in a flat, efficient arc. It struck the dorsal side of his shooting hand with a wet crack. Metacarpals failed. The AR-15 slipped free, hit the concrete, skidded into shadow. Harrison sucked air through clenched teeth, A sharp involuntary hiss, pain blooming up his forearm. They closed the distance without words. Harrison swung first, a looping right meant to crush rather than control. Dyna slipped inside the arc, forearm braced, elbow tucked. She answered with a short knee to the femoral triangle, testing balance, then a palm strike that snapped his head back. Krav Maga met SEAL combatives in tight quarters clinics versus doctrine. Harrison tried to clinch, to lean his weight in, shoulders bunching as he sought leverage. Dyna's breath stayed measured. 4-count inhale, controlled exhale, her eyes tracking microshifts in his stance. He was strong, still dangerous, his grip clamped on her vest, fingers digging into webbing, dragging her toward a rusted column. She felt the tremor in his arms, the lag between intent and execution. Age announced itself in milliseconds. She used them. A heel stomp collapsed his foot, a forearm smash stunned the brachial plexus. Harrison grunted, spit flying, copper bright in the flare's dying light. He raked at her face. Dyna turned her cheek, felt skin tear along the jawline, heat and wetness. She didn't flinch. She drove him back, shoulder into sternum, pinning him against a structural beam. Old iron bit into his spine. His breath hitched, a trap animal sound. She locked his elbow, hyperextended until compliance was inevitable. Why? The word came out low, steady, carried on breath she refused to waste. Harrison laughed once, a broken bark, then spat blood that darkened the dust at their feet. His left eye flutter, a nervous tic she remembered from range days. The pension doesn't cover the nightmares, he wheezed. I needed a payout. Dyna's jaw tightened. The tick in her own eyelid stilled. You forgot the oath, she said. Barely above a whisper, she rolled him, controlled the descent, drove his wrists together behind his back. The zip ties sang as she cinched them tight, plastic biting into skin until his hands purpled. She checked capillary refill out of habit, then let go. Harrison slumped, breath ragged, greed finally stripped of its uniform. Sirens rose in the distance one, then many Doppler bending sound into urgency. Red and blue strobed through the broken slats, painting the sawmill in law and consequence. Tires shrieked outside, doors slammed, boots hit gravel. Harrison coughed, a wheeze turning into a laugh that shook his ribs. You called them. His eyes flicked toward the exits. I own the sheriff. Dyna reached into her vest and withdrew a palm-sized camera, its indicator light still blinking. She held it where he could see it, steady despite the tremor finally leaking into her fingers. I didn't call the sheriff, she said. I live-streamed your confession to a private server accessed by the Inspector General. The FBI is here for you, sir. The words landed heavier than any strike. Harrison's shoulders sagged. The fight left him all at once, breath collapsing into shallow pulls. The realization etched itself across his face, jaw slack, eyes dulling as the machinery he thought he had sidestepped closed in. Bureaucracy. Paper trails. Warrants. Dyna stepped back as flashlights cut through the dark, voices stacking, commands crisp. She wiped blood from her jaw with the back of her hand and stood straight, hands visible, spine aligned. Quiet, professional. The sun climbed over the tree line with clinical indifference, its first light cutting through the fog that still clung to the sawmill like residue. Floodlights snapped off one by one as federal vans rolled forward, tires crunching over gravel. Doors slid open. Harrison was guided out first, wrists bound, posture collapsed inward. His once-pressed tactical shirt was streaked with grime and blood. He didn't look up. A medic glanced at his hand, noted swelling and deformity, and tagged him for transport without ceremony. The Iron Vipers followed, some limping, some carried, all stripped of bravado. Zip ties bit into wrists. One biker retched beside a van, ball splashing onto the dirt. Another stared straight ahead, eyes unfocused, jaw trembling in a silent tick that wouldn't stop. Evidence technicians moved with latex deficiency, photographing pressure plates, wiring, counterweights, the PA system. Every step documented, every lie already dead. The ledger sat sealed in an evidence bag, thick with tabs and annotations. Chain of custody forms were signed. Nearby, under a white sheet, the body of the EPA agent lay still. A gunshot wound carefully measured, Brad's work. The kind that ended careers and lives in equal measure. There was no ambiguity left to exploit. An FBI agent approached Dyna as she stood apart from the activity, hands clasped loosely behind her back. Her jaw was swollen, a thin line of dried blood tracing her cheek. She didn't touch it. Her breathing had settled into a slow, disciplined rhythm. The agent's eyes flicked to her posture, the way she held space without occupying it. "We can give you a ride, ma'am," he said, voice neutral, professional. Dana's gaze shifted to the Harley Dyna lowrider parked near the edge of the yard. Scratches scored the tank, dust dulled the chrome. The bike carried tags now, technically evidence, flagged for processing. She felt the weight of the night in her shoulders, then let it pass. "I'll take my own transport," she replied. The agent hesitated. A pen paused over his clipboard. He glanced at the bike, then back at her face. Something unspoken moved between them, an acknowledgement without language. He nodded once. "We'll need to process that bike eventually. But take a few days." Dana inclined her head. No smile, no thanks. She swung onto the Dyna, boots finding the pegs by muscle memory. As she adjusted her grip, a flatbed truck rolled past, carrying a compacted cube of blue metal strapped down with chains. What remained of her F-150? The sight tightened her throat, a breath caught, then released. The memory surfaced, hands on a steering wheel once warm with life, keys pressed into her palm, but it didn't take her under. She had already paid the price forward. Her thumb hit the ignition. The engine turned, then roared awake. The sound was deep, guttural, vibrating through bone and ground alike. It echoed off the canyon walls, a living thing. Heads turned, radios crackled. No one stopped her. She eased the clutch, rolled forward, and felt the bike respond, clean, aggressive, honest. As the road opened and the sun cleared the ridge, Dana didn't look back. She wasn't just a soldier anymore, and she wasn't a victim. She was the consequence of pressure applied in the wrong direction. The Dyna carried her into the light, the rumble fading as she rode toward whatever came next. Purpose didn't arrive quietly, but once found, it stayed. If you want more stories like this, grounded, relentless, and earned, subscribe to the channel and stay with us.